The Dragon Princess never had a Christmas until a human janitor changed that in one night. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. The galactic spire loomed over the frozen planet of Vexorus 7, a monument of steel and crystal that housed diplomats from 800 species. Inside its pristine corridors, maintenance worker Ethan Cole pushed his cleaning cart past another group of delegates who didn't bother to acknowledge his existence. He didn't mind. In the 3 years since humanity joined the Galactic Union, he learned that most species saw janitors as invisible furniture, and that suited him just fine. Princess Sarenth of the Dracarii Empire swept through the station's diplomatic wing with the kind of presence that made lesser beings step aside. Her scales shimmered like molten copper in the artificial light, and her wings, though folded against her back, still managed to knock over a potted plant as she turned a corner. She was the youngest daughter of Emperor Vaxton, sent to this frozen wasteland to learn diplomacy, while her more favored siblings remained home to jockey for position in the imperial court. The assignment was meant to be a punishment, a reminder that she had spoken too freely about her father's war policies during a state dinner. Sarenth had been on Vexorus 7 for 8 months, and every single day felt like an eternity. The station operated on a universal calendar that attempted to acknowledge the festivals and celebrations of its diverse population. But with 800 species and thousands of different traditions, the task was impossible. Most delegates simply marked their own people's holidays privately, in their quarters, away from the judging eyes of others. Sarenth had no holidays to celebrate. The Dracarii marked military victories and conquest anniversaries, events she found increasingly hollow as she matured beyond the propaganda of her youth. Ethan was whistling as he mopped the floor outside the main conference hall. It was December 23rd by Earth's calendar, and despite being light years from home, he felt the familiar warmth of the approaching holiday. He'd managed to acquire a small synthetic tree for his quarters, and had even convinced the station's fabrication unit to produce something approximating gingerbread cookies. They tasted like cardboard mixed with cinnamon-scented cleaning solution, but the effort mattered more than the result. He didn't notice the Dragon Princess watching him from the doorway of a side corridor. Sarenth had stopped because the sound he was making, that strange melodic breathing, was unlike anything she'd encountered before. Dracarii didn't whistle. Their vocal structures produced roars, growls, and a sophisticated system of harmonic tones, but nothing like this simple, cheerful noise. Ethan turned and nearly jumped out of his skin when he saw her. The princess was easily 3 meters tall, with a crown of horns that swept back from her skull like a natural tiara. Her eyes were golden with vertical pupils, and they were staring at him with an intensity that made him suddenly very aware of his threadbare uniform and the mop in his hands. Then Sarenth spoke, surprising herself as much as him by saying the words that came to mind. "What is that sound you were making, human?" The princess had addressed him directly. In 3 years, Ethan could count on one hand the number of delegates who'd spoken to him as anything other than an obstacle to work around. He cleared his throat nervously and replied, "Oh, that's whistling, Your Highness. It's just something humans do when we're happy or trying to pass the time." Sarenth tilted her head, a gesture that reminded Ethan of a curious cat. If cats were the size of small vehicles and could probably bite him in half without much effort. The princess took a step closer and asked another question. "And why would you be happy while performing manual labor in an empty corridor?" Ethan leaned on his mop handle and shrugged with a smile. "Well, it's almost Christmas, Your Highness. That's a human holiday. Even being this far from Earth, I can't help but feel good about it." The word was unfamiliar to Sarenth, and her translator Chip, which usually handled linguistic conversions seamlessly, seemed to stumble over it. The device produced only a rough approximation that translated as celebration of birth of religious figure, but the emotional context felt far more complex. She found herself asking him to explain further. "What is this Christmas?" Ethan's face lit up in a way that made Sarenth's secondary eyelids flicker in surprise. Humans had such expressive faces, she'd noticed, able to convey dozens of emotions in the movement of their small, flexible features. The janitor set his mop aside and began to talk, his words flowing with genuine enthusiasm. Christmas is a lot of things, he began. Originally, it celebrated the birth of a religious teacher named Jesus, but over time it became something bigger. It's about family and giving and making the dark part of winter a little brighter. We decorate trees, exchange gifts, share meals with the people we love. It's about hope and joy and remembering that even in cold, dark times, there's warmth to be found if you know where to look. Sarenth absorbed his words with growing fascination. The Dracarii had nothing like this. Their celebrations revolved around displays of strength, commemorations of battles won and enemies vanquished. The idea of a holiday centered on warmth and giving rather than conquest was alien to her, and yet it resonated with something deep inside that she'd never been able to name. She asked him quietly, almost hesitantly, "Do you miss your home during this time?" Ethan nodded slowly, and Sarenth saw a flicker of sadness cross his features before he smiled again. "Yeah, I do. But that's part of being out here, right? Humanity's new to the galactic stage. Somebody's got to keep the floors clean on distant stations." He laughed softly at his own joke. "Besides, Christmas isn't really about the place. It's about the feeling. I can carry that with me anywhere." The princess found herself making a decision that surprised her. "Would you?" She paused, searching for the right words. "Would you tell me more about this Christmas? I have no duties for the remainder of the evening, and I find myself curious about human traditions." Ethan blinked in surprise, but recovered quickly. He'd been trained in basic diplomatic protocols, even as a maintenance worker, and refusing a direct request from a member of the Dracarii royal family seemed like a poor career move. More than that, though, the princess seemed genuinely interested, and Ethan had always been a sucker for anyone who wanted to learn about Earth's cultures. "Sure, Your Highness. I'd be happy to. Would you like to see my quarters? I've set up a few decorations." Sarenth followed the human through the station's less glamorous sections, noting how different these corridors were from the polished diplomatic wings. The walls here were functional rather than beautiful, marked with the scuffs and stains of heavy use. Other maintenance workers nodded to Ethan as they passed, and several did double takes at seeing a Dracarii princess in their domain. Sarenth felt oddly liberated by the anonymity of these passages, where no one expected her to maintain the perfect posture and cold dignity demanded in the diplomatic circles. Ethan's quarters were exactly what Sarenth had expected: small, efficiently designed, with barely enough room for a human to live comfortably, let alone a Dracarii. Yet as she ducked through the doorway, folding her wings tightly against her back, she found herself charmed by what the janitor had managed to do with such limited space. The synthetic tree stood in the corner, barely a meter tall, decorated with strings of small lights that pulsed in gentle, warm colors. Handmade ornaments hung from its branches, folded paper in intricate shapes, bits of colored foil twisted into stars, even what appeared to be a tiny spaceship crafted from spare parts. The room smelled of something sweet and spicy, and Sarenth's sensitive nose identified cinnamon, ginger, and something else she couldn't name. Ethan gestured to the tree with obvious pride. "I know it's not much compared to what we'd have on Earth, but I did my best with what I could scavenge and fabricate. The ornaments are all handmade. That's traditional too, actually. Some families pass down ornaments through generations, each one with its own story." Sarenth moved closer to the tree, careful not to knock it over with her tail. Each ornament did seem to have a story written in its construction. A paper crane folded with obvious care, a star made from the foil of ration packages, a small hollow projector displaying a snowy landscape on loop. She asked him softly, "You made all of these yourself?" Ethan nodded, moving to pour 2 cups of something from a small heating unit. "Most of them, yeah." The hollow projector was a gift from another human worker who transferred to a different station last year. "It shows my hometown during winter. I watch it sometimes when I'm feeling homesick." He handed her one of the cups, and Sarenth took it carefully, her claws making the simple action awkward. "It's hot cocoa." "Well, the station's approximation of it, anyway. Another Christmas tradition." Sarenth sipped the drink cautiously and was surprised by the rich, sweet taste. The warmth spread through her in a way that had nothing to do with her internal body temperature. She'd never experienced anything quite like it. The princess settled onto the floor, her size making it impossible to use the room's human-scaled furniture, and found herself asking question after question about Christmas traditions. Ethan explained them all with patience and enthusiasm. He told her about Santa Claus, a mythical figure who rewarded good behavior with gifts, and she was delighted by the absurdity of it. He described Christmas carols, songs that humans sang together during the holiday season, and even played a few recordings from his personal collection. He talked about stockings hung by fireplaces, about leaving cookies and milk for Santa, about the tradition of kissing under mistletoe, about ugly sweater parties and advent calendars, and all the small rituals that made the season special. Hours passed without either of them noticing. Sarenth was entranced by these traditions, so different from everything she'd known in the Dracarii Empire. There was a gentleness to Christmas, a focus on joy and giving that stood in stark contrast to her people's obsession with strength and dominance. For the first time in months, she forgot about the political games of her father's court, the endless posturing of diplomatic negotiations, the weight of imperial expectations. Then Ethan mentioned something that made Sarentha's breath catch in her throat. The best part of Christmas, though, is the gift-giving. It's not about expensive things or showing off wealth. It's about finding something that shows you know someone, that you've paid attention to what makes them happy. The thought behind the gift matters more than its value. Sarenth looked down at her claws, at the ceremonial rings that marked her rank, the jeweled bands that were worth more than Ethan would earn in his lifetime. No one had ever given her a gift chosen because they knew her. Every present she'd received had been a calculated political gesture, selected by advisors and designed to curry favor with her father. The idea that a gift could be personal, meaningful, chosen out of genuine care rather than political calculation, struck her as revolutionary. She asked him quietly, barely above a whisper, "Has anyone ever given you such a gift?" Ethan smiled, and there was a depth of emotion in his expression that Sarenth was only beginning to understand. "My grandmother did, every year. She passed away a few years before I left Earth, but I still have the last thing she made me." He reached into a drawer and pulled out a hand-knitted scarf, worn soft with age and use, in shades of blue and green. She made this herself. Took her 3 months because her hands were getting stiff with arthritis. When I wear it, I can still remember her hugs, the way her house always smelled like baking bread, how she'd always have a kind word no matter how bad my day had been. Sarenth felt something wet on her scales and realized with shock that she was crying. Dracarii rarely cried. Their tear ducts produced moisture only in extreme emotional distress. She tried to wipe away the tears quickly, embarrassed by this display of weakness, but Ethan had already noticed. The human moved closer, his small hand reaching up to gently touch her arm, and his voice was soft with concern. "Hey, it's okay. Christmas can be emotional. It makes us remember the people we love, the moments that mattered. There's no shame in that." Sarenth looked at this small human, this janitor that the other delegates wouldn't even acknowledge, and saw something that she'd never found in any member of her father's court. Genuine kindness without agenda, warmth without calculation. She asked him a question that had been building throughout their conversation. "Do you think, could someone like me, someone not human, could they celebrate Christmas too?" Ethan's smile was immediate and bright. "Of course. Christmas is about the feeling, remember? It's about choosing to find joy and spread kindness. Anyone can do that, regardless of what species they are." He glanced at his chronometer and added, "Actually, it's past midnight now by Earth's calendar. That means it's officially Christmas Eve. You know what? I have an idea, if you're willing to trust me." Sarenth found that she was willing to trust him, which was itself remarkable. In the cutthroat environment of Dracarii politics, trust was a weakness to be exploited. But here, in this tiny room with its handmade decorations and its smell of synthetic cocoa, trust felt natural. She nodded her agreement. Ethan's idea was audacious in its simplicity. Over the next hour, they made their way through the service corridors of the station, the janitor leading the princess on what he called a Christmas adventure. Their first stop was the fabrication lab, where Ethan sweet-talked the night shift operator, a Zentarian named Gleb, into helping them create some items. Sarenth watched in fascination as Ethan designed and produced small gifts. A set of hand warmers for the Kylothian delegate who was always complaining about the station's temperature. A specialized stylus for the Menthry artist whose manipulator appendages struggled with standard tools. a collection of herbal teas for the Vorsan ambassador who'd mentioned missing flavors from his home world. Each gift was thoughtful, personal, chosen because Ethan had paid attention during his months of invisibly cleaning the station's corridors. He'd listened when others thought no one was listening, had noticed details that the diplomats themselves overlooked about each other. Sarenth helped where she could, using her diplomatic access to authorize fabrication requests that would normally be denied to a maintenance worker. Together, they created a collection of small kindnesses, each one wrapped in whatever colorful material they could scavenge. Their next stop was the station's observation deck, usually closed during night cycle, but accessible to someone with Sarenth's security clearance. Ethan set up his portable music player, and as human Christmas carols echoed softly through the empty space, he taught Sarenth how to wrap presents. The princess's claws were not designed for such delicate work, and she tore more paper than she folded, but Ethan laughed with her rather than at her, and slowly she improved. As they worked, Ethan told her more stories about Christmas traditions from different human cultures. He described how Filipinos celebrated with giant lanterns, how Ethiopians marked the day with white robes and ancient rituals, how Mexicans held Las Posadas processions. Sarenth realized that human Christmas was not one tradition, but thousands, each culture adding its own flavor while maintaining the core themes of generosity and togetherness. The princess asked him about this diversity. Your species seems so fragmented, with so many different ways of celebrating the same holiday. Does this not cause conflict? Ethan shook his head while taping down a particularly stubborn corner of wrapping paper. Sometimes, sure, humans aren't perfect. But mostly, we've learned that different doesn't mean wrong. The beauty of Christmas is that it's flexible enough to embrace all these variations. Whether you're celebrating in a tropical paradise or a frozen tundra, whether you're religious or secular, whether your traditions are ancient or brand new, the heart of it remains the same. Choosing kindness over indifference, togetherness over isolation. Sarenth thought about her own people, about the rigid hierarchy of the Dracarii Empire. The way deviation from tradition was seen as weakness, the constant pressure to conform to an ancient ideal of what their species should be. She said quietly, "My people would see such flexibility as chaos, as a loss of identity." Ethan looked up at her, his eyes serious. "Maybe, but from where I'm sitting, holding too tightly to one way of being seems like the real loss. Humanity nearly destroyed itself in wars over who had the right beliefs, the right traditions, the right way to live. We only survive by learning to celebrate our differences instead of fighting over them." He smiled and added, "Besides, wouldn't it be boring if everyone was exactly the same?" They finished wrapping the last present as the station's artificial dawn began to brighten the observation deck's viewports. Ethan stretched and surveyed their work with satisfaction. "Okay, now comes the fun part. We deliver them." Sarenth felt a flutter of nervousness in her chest. What if the recipients were offended? What if they saw the gifts as beneath them, or worse, as some kind of political maneuver? But Ethan's confidence was infectious, and she found herself following his lead as they began their delivery route. They left the presents anonymously, placing them outside quarters with nothing but a small card that read, "Merry Christmas from a friend." Ethan insisted on this anonymity, explaining that the best gifts were given without expectation of recognition or reward. They moved through the station like benevolent ghosts, leaving small packages of kindness in their wake. The last gift was different. Ethan had created it while Sarenth was distracted with wrapping the others, and he presented it to her as they returned to the observation deck. It was a small ornament, carefully crafted from bits of copper-colored metal shaped and welded to resemble dragon scales. In the center was a tiny crystal that caught the light and refracted it into rainbow patterns. He handed it to her with a shy smile. "I made this for you, for your first Christmas. I thought maybe you could start your own tradition, if you wanted. Every year, you could add a new ornament, something that represents what mattered to you that year. Eventually, you'd have a whole collection of memories." Sarenth took the ornament with trembling hands, her claws handling it as gently as she could manage. No one had ever made her something before, not really. The gifts she'd received were bought or commissioned, created by servants or artisans, never by the giver themselves. This small piece of metal, rough around the edges and imperfect in its construction, was the most valuable thing she'd ever been given. She tried to speak, but found her voice caught in her throat. Ethan seemed to understand, and he simply stood beside her, looking out at the stars visible through the viewport. Finally, Sarenth managed to say what she was feeling. "Thank you. Not just for the gift, but for all of this. For sharing your tradition with me. For treating me like a person instead of a title. I have been on this station for 8 months, and I have spoken with hundreds of delegates, but I have never had a conversation as meaningful as the one we shared tonight." Ethan bumped her arm gently with his shoulder, the human gesture of camaraderie looking absurd given their size difference. That's what Christmas is about. Connecting with each other as people, not as positions or ranks or species. I'm glad I could share it with you. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars. Then Sarenth said something that surprised even herself. "I want to do this again next year, and I want to bring others into it. The other delegates, the ones who seem lost like I was. I want to show them what you showed me." Ethan grinned widely. "Now you're getting it. That's the Christmas spirit right there, wanting to pass along the joy you received." He looked thoughtful for a moment before adding, "You know, with your diplomatic influence and my knowledge of the station's operations, we could probably put together something pretty special. A real Christmas celebration, open to anyone who wants to participate." The idea took root in Sarenth's mind, growing and expanding. She could already envision it. A grand celebration that honored the human tradition while welcoming adaptations from other species. A night dedicated to breaking down the barriers of rank and race that normally defined life on the station. It would be unprecedented, possibly controversial. But wasn't that exactly what Christmas was about? Choosing hope and joy even when it was difficult? The two of them spent the rest of Christmas Eve planning, their ideas building on each other in a cascade of creativity. Ethan would handle the practical arrangements, using his network of maintenance workers and service staff who knew every hidden corner of the station. Sarenth would provide diplomatic cover and help navigate the complex web of protocols that govern station activities. Together, they would create something neither could accomplish alone. As the station's day cycle officially began, they parted ways with a promise to meet again soon to continue their planning. Sarenth returned to her diplomatic quarters, where her attendants fussed over her unusual absence and disheveled appearance. She ignored their concerns, instead placing her new ornament on her desk where she could see it, a tangible reminder of the night that had changed everything. Over the following weeks, Sarenth found herself seeing the station through new eyes. Where before she had noticed only the political tensions and diplomatic maneuvering, she now saw the individuals behind the titles. The Vorsan ambassador who loved poetry but never had anyone to share it with. The Kylothian delegate who played a musical instrument late at night when she thought no one could hear. The Zentarian trade representative who collected jokes from different species and laughed quietly to himself while reviewing them. Ethan had shown her that beneath the formal facades, everyone on the station was simply a person far from home, trying to find meaning in their work and connection in their isolation. Armed with this new perspective, Sarenth began to engage with her fellow delegates differently. She asked questions not as diplomatic gambits, but out of genuine curiosity. She listened not for strategic advantage, but because she actually cared about the answers. To her surprise, others responded. Conversations became deeper, more authentic. The rigid walls of diplomatic protocol began to crack, just slightly, allowing glimpses of the real people underneath. Ethan, for his part, discovered that having a princess as a co-conspirator opened doors he'd never known existed. Resources that would normally be denied to a maintenance worker became available through Sarenth's authorization. Spaces usually restricted to diplomats could be accessed for their planning sessions. Most importantly, Sarenth's enthusiasm and vision pushed Ethan to think bigger than he'd initially imagined. What had started as a simple idea for a small gathering evolved into plans for a proper Christmas celebration, complete with decorations throughout the public areas of the station, a feast incorporating dishes from multiple species, and activities designed to encourage interaction across cultural boundaries. They recruited others to help, carefully selecting individuals who seemed open to the idea of cross-species celebration. Gleb, the Zentarian fabrication operator, became their primary source for materials and technical solutions. Maya Kendrick, a human botanist studying extremophile plants in the station's science wing, helped them design decorations that wouldn't trigger allergies or sensory issues for the station's diverse population. Tharnas, a young Kylothian diplomat who'd become friends with Sarenth during her months on the station, used his species' natural talent for logistics to help coordinate the complex scheduling required to host an event for hundreds of beings with different biological needs and cultural sensitivities. The more they worked together, the more the project took on a life of its own. What had begun as Sarenth's desire to recreate the magic of that first Christmas Eve became something larger, a statement that connection was possible across the vast differences that separated species, that celebration could be shared even when traditions were not, that kindness and joy were universal languages. Not everyone approved. Some delegates saw the whole endeavor as frivolous, a waste of time and resources. Others viewed it with suspicion, wondering what political game the Dracarii princess was really playing. There were concerns about religious implications, about whether celebrating a human holiday was appropriate for a multi-species station, about whether such fraternization undermined the dignity required for proper diplomatic relations. Sarenth faced criticism from her own people as well. The Dracarii ambassador, a stern military commander named Verex, summoned her to his office and lectured her on the importance of maintaining proper imperial dignity. A princess of the Dracarii Empire did not engage in frivolous celebrations with lesser species, he told her. Such behavior reflected poorly on her father's reign and on the empire itself. Sarenth listened to his criticisms with the patient expression she'd perfected over years of dealing with her father's advisors. And then she said something she'd never had the courage to say before. With respect, Ambassador Verex, I disagree. The strength of the empire should not be measured solely by our military victories or our ability to intimidate others. True strength includes the confidence to engage with other species as equals, to learn from them, and to find common ground despite our differences. If we are so fragile that a simple celebration threatens our identity, perhaps we are not as strong as we believe. Verex's scales had darkened with anger, but he couldn't actually forbid her from proceeding. Sarenth was still a princess, and while she might be out of favor with her father, she still outranked a mere ambassador. She left his office with her head high, even though her hearts were pounding with adrenaline. Standing up to Dracarii authority figures was dangerous, but Ethan had shown her that some things were worth the risk. As the date of the celebration approached, excitement began to build throughout the station. The mystery gifts that Sarenth and Ethan had delivered on that first Christmas Eve had sparked curiosity and warmth in their recipients. Word spread of the upcoming celebration, and more beings began to volunteer their help. A Minthari chef offered to prepare human Christmas cookies using ingredients compatible with multiple species' digestive systems. A group of Vorsen engineers constructed a lighting system that could project simulated snow in the main atrium. Even some of the initially skeptical delegates found themselves caught up in the preparations, contributing ideas and resources. Ethan worked himself nearly to exhaustion, using every spare moment to prepare. He taught other humans on the station how to make paper snowflakes and construct garlands. He programmed the fabrication units to produce ornaments in styles that would appeal to different species' aesthetics. He collaborated with the station's AI to create a playlist of music that included not just human Christmas carols, but festive songs from dozens of other cultures, blending them into a harmonious whole that celebrated all of them. Sarenth used her diplomatic skills to navigate the complex web of permissions and protocols required to make the celebration official. She drafted proposals, sat through tedious committee meetings, and called in favors she'd accumulated during her months on the station. She also reached out to her siblings back home, sending them messages that carefully described what she was doing and why it mattered. To her surprise, her older brother Corvin responded with cautious interest, mentioning that perhaps their father's rigid approach to foreign relations was not the only path forward for the empire. The night before the celebration, Ethan and Sarenth met one last time in the observation deck to review their preparations. Everything was ready. The decorations were installed, the food was prepared, the schedule was set. All that remained was to see if anyone would actually come. Sarenth confessed her fears to Ethan as they stood together looking out at the stars. What if we have built all of this and no one attends? What if the delegates decide that their dignity is more important than celebration? What if I have pushed too hard and created resentment instead of joy? Ethan took her massive claw in both his small hands and said with absolute confidence, "Then we'll celebrate just the two of us, and it will still have been worth it. You've already changed, Sarenth. I've watched you grow more confident, more open, more willing to challenge the expectations placed on you. Whatever happens tomorrow, that growth is real and valuable. Besides," he added with a grin, "I have a good feeling about this. People are hungry for connection, for something more than the endless political games. You've given them permission to be themselves for one night. I think you'll be surprised by how many take you up on that offer." His confidence bolstered her own. They spent the rest of the evening in comfortable conversation, talking not about the celebration but about smaller things. Ethan's memories of Christmases past, Sarantha's stories of flying through the crystal canyons of her home world, their shared observations about the quirks of various station residents. It was the kind of easy friendship that transcended species difference, and Sarenth found herself grateful beyond words that a random encounter in a corridor had led her to this strange, wonderful human. The next evening, as the celebration's start time approached, Sarenth stood in her quarters, staring at her reflection in the full-length mirror. She'd chosen to wear simple attire rather than her usual formal diplomatic regalia, a comfortable tunic in deep green with minimal jewelry. Ethan had explained that Christmas was not about impressing others with wealth or status, and she wanted to embody that principle. Still, nervousness made her scales ripple with iridescent patterns, a physiological response she couldn't quite control. When she arrived at the main atrium, she found Ethan already there, making final adjustments to a string of lights. He'd dressed up too, trading his usual maintenance uniform for clean civilian clothes that made him look less like a janitor and more like the educated, thoughtful person he actually was. He smiled when he saw her, and together they surveyed what they had created. The atrium had been transformed. Lights in every color imaginable were strung from the ceiling, creating a canopy of gentle illumination. The Vorsen snow projection system filled the air with lazily drifting simulated flakes that disappeared before touching the ground. Tables held food from dozens of worlds, each dish labeled with its ingredients and cultural significance. A massive collaborative tree stood in the center, decorated with ornaments representing the home worlds of every species on the station. Music played softly in the background, a carefully curated mix that cycled through festive songs from multiple cultures. For the first few minutes after the official start time, Sarantha's fears seemed realized. The atrium remained empty except for her and Ethan and the small group of volunteers who'd helped with preparations. Then, slowly, delegates began to arrive. First came the ones who'd been most supportive during planning. Tharnis and a group of other young Kalothian diplomats, Maya Kendrick and her fellow human researchers, Gleb with several other Zentarian workers. Then others followed, curiosity overcoming caution. A trio of Menthry artists, the Vorsen poetry-loving ambassador, even some of the more conservative delegates who entered cautiously, as if expecting a trap. Within half an hour, the atrium was full. Beings from dozens of species mingled in ways that would never happen during formal diplomatic functions. The usual rigid hierarchies dissolved as delegates discovered shared interests with maintenance workers, as ambassadors laughed at jokes told by entry-level staff, as beings who'd never spoken beyond perfunctory greetings found themselves in deep conversations about art, philosophy, and the experience of being far from home. Ethan had set up several activity stations, and they proved remarkably popular. At one table, beings with appropriate manipulator appendages tried their hand at decorating cookies under Maya's cheerful instruction. The results were often hilariously bad, but the laughter was genuine. Another station offered materials for making ornaments, and Sarenth was touched to see her stern military advisors carefully crafting paper decorations with surprising concentration. A third area had been set up for storytelling, where anyone could share a tradition from their own culture. The stories ranged from solemn to silly, but each was listened to with respect and interest. The Vorsen ambassador, whose name Sarenth had learned was Telvin, approached her midway through the evening. He was a stately being, his species resembling tall, slender trees with faces formed from knots in their bark-like skin. He spoke in the slow, measured tones of his people. Princess Sarenth, I must confess I had doubts about this gathering. I feared it would be superficial, a pale imitation of true cultural exchange. I was wrong. What you have created here is genuine. I have had more meaningful conversations tonight than in my entire posting to this station. Sarenth felt warmth spread through her at his words. Thank you, Ambassador Telvin. But I cannot take full credit. This was inspired by a human tradition, shared with me by a generous teacher. She gestured to where Ethan was showing a group of Zentarians how to wrap presents, his patience endless as he demonstrated the technique for the 4th time. Telvin followed her gaze and made a sound that was the Vorsen equivalent of a thoughtful hum. It is remarkable how much wisdom can be found in unexpected places. We diplomats often assume that those in service positions have little to teach us, but perhaps we have been looking in the wrong places for insight all along. As the evening progressed, the celebration took on a momentum of its own. Someone suggested a gift exchange, and beings hurried back to their quarters to grab small items to share. The gifts were often humble, things that had personal meaning rather than monetary value, and the exchanges sparked new friendships and deeper understanding. Ethan's recorded Christmas carols inspired some beings to share songs from their own cultures, and soon an impromptu concert had formed, with species taking turns performing festive music. The variety was stunning, from the harmonic chanting of the Vorsens to the rhythmic drumming of the Kylothians to the haunting whistle songs of the Minthari. Sarenth found herself pulled into conversation after conversation, and for the first time since arriving on the station, she felt truly connected to those around her. The masks of diplomatic formality had fallen away, revealing the persons beneath. She learned that Ambassador Varex, despite his stern criticism, had a secret passion for ancient Dracarii poetry and had once dreamed of being a scholar rather than a soldier. She discovered that one of the Minthari delegates was homesick for her children and kept a hollow album of them that she watched every night. She heard stories of loss and hope, of dreams abandoned and new dreams found, of the universal experience of trying to find meaning in a vast and often lonely universe. Late in the evening, Ethan found her standing quietly near the collaborative tree, watching the celebration with an expression of wonder. He joined her, and they stood together in comfortable silence for a moment before he spoke. You did good, Your Highness. Really good. Sarenth shook her head gently. We did good. I could never have created this without you. You gave me the gift of seeing possibilities I never knew existed. Ethan smiled, and then pulled something from his pocket. Speaking of gifts, I have something for you. He handed her a small wrapped package, and she opened it carefully to find a data chip. It's a collection of human Christmas movies and specials, he explained. Some are silly, some are sentimental, but they all capture different aspects of what the holiday means. I thought you might enjoy exploring the tradition more deeply. Consider it your Christmas present. Sarenth accepted the gift with profound gratitude, and then she retrieved something from a concealed pocket in her tunic. I have something for you as well. It is not much, but I wanted you to have it. She handed him an intricately carved piece of crystal, no larger than his thumb, shaped into the form of a dragon in flight. She'd made it herself over the past weeks, working in secret with tools borrowed from the Minthari artists, learning the delicate craft of crystal carving specifically for this purpose. It represents the Dracarii belief that freedom is found not in power over others, but in the courage to be oneself. You taught me that courage, Ethan Cole. This is my thanks. Ethan held the crystal up to the light, and it cast rainbow patterns across his face. His eyes were suspiciously bright as he thanked her. I'll treasure this always. He attached it to the chain he wore around his neck, where it hung next to his identification tags. There. Now I'll carry a piece of this night with me wherever I go. The celebration continued well past its scheduled end time, with no one wanting to leave the warmth and connection they'd found. When delegates finally began to drift away, it was with reluctance and with promises to do this again, to not let the barriers of rank and duty rebuild the walls that had fallen tonight. Sarenth and Ethan were among the last to leave, staying to help with cleanup along with a dedicated group of volunteers who'd grown to love what they'd created together. As they worked, Gleb asked a question that several others had been wondering about. So, Princess Sarenth, Ethan, is this going to be an annual thing? Because if you need help next year, count me in. Sarenth and Ethan exchanged glances, and in that shared look was the answer. Yes, Sarenth said firmly. This will be an annual celebration. But more than that, I hope it will be the beginning of something larger. We have proven tonight that connection across species is not only possible, but necessary. We have shown that celebration and joy are not frivolous distractions from important work, but are themselves important work. I intend to carry this lesson forward in all my diplomatic efforts. The words were more than just a promise about a holiday celebration. They were a declaration of a new approach, a commitment to the values that Christmas represented. Sarenth had arrived on Vexorus 7 as a disgraced princess sent into exile, but she would leave, whenever that time came, as someone transformed, carrying the knowledge that true strength lay not in domination, but in the courage to connect, to be vulnerable, to care about others regardless of their species or status. In the weeks following the celebration, the effects rippled outward through the station. Negotiations that had been stalled for months suddenly found resolution as delegates approached discussions with newfound empathy and willingness to understand opposing viewpoints. The rigid hierarchies that had defined station life began to soften, with more mixing between ranks and positions. Small traditions emerged, like weekly cross-species meals and cultural exchange programs, all inspired by the Christmas celebration's success. For Sarenth, the changes were even more profound. Her reports back to the Dracarii Empire began to include suggestions for reform, for new approaches to diplomacy that prioritized mutual benefit over dominance. Her brother Corvin became an ally in these efforts, quietly building support among younger members of the imperial court for a more progressive vision of their species' role in the galactic community. Her father remained skeptical, but even he could not ignore the successes his youngest daughter was achieving in negotiations that had previously been intractable. Ethan continued his work as a janitor, but with a new understanding of the power that even the humblest position could hold. He started teaching classes on human culture for any station residents who were interested, sharing not just information about Earth, but the philosophy of connection and respect that he demonstrated so well. His small quarters became a gathering place for beings seeking something more than the formal interactions of diplomatic life, a space where anyone, regardless of rank or species, could find warmth and acceptance. The friendship between the princess and the janitor became legendary on the station, a story that was told and retold as an example of how meaningful connection could form in the most unlikely circumstances. They met regularly, sometimes to plan the next year's celebration, but more often simply to talk, to share their lives, to be friends in the truest sense of the word. Sarenth learned to appreciate human humor and storytelling. Ethan gained insight into Dracarii history and culture that few humans had ever received. A year passed, and the second annual Christmas celebration was even larger than the first, with advanced planning committees formed and representatives from every delegation involved in the organization. The event had evolved beyond a simple party into a genuine cross-species tradition, adapted and expanded to honor the diverse cultures of all who participated while maintaining the core human values of generosity, joy, and connection that had inspired it. Sarenth stood in the atrium on this second Christmas, watching beings from dozens of worlds celebrate together, and felt a profound sense of accomplishment. She'd been sent to this frozen station as punishment, exiled from her home for speaking uncomfortable truths. But in that exile, she'd found something far more valuable than imperial favor. She'd found purpose, friendship, and a vision of what the galaxy could be if beings chose connection over division. Ethan joined her, as he always did during these moments of reflection. He'd been promoted, given a supervisory position in recognition of his contributions to station morale and interspecies relations, but he still wore his maintenance uniform with pride. He looked out at the celebration and said quietly, "You know, when I shared Christmas with you that first night, I never imagined it would become all of this." Sarenth placed a gentle claw on his shoulder, careful not to damage the fabric of his uniform. "Neither did I. But that is the nature of genuine giving, is it not? We cannot predict how a small act of kindness will grow, what ripples it will create. We can only choose to offer what we have with an open heart and trust that it will find fertile ground. Ethan nodded thoughtfully. My grandmother used to say something similar. She'd tell me that the best gifts keep giving long after they're received, that true generosity creates cycles of kindness that spread far beyond the original giver's intention. I think she'd have loved seeing this. They stood together in comfortable silence, two beings from vastly different worlds who'd found common ground in a simple human tradition, and through that tradition had sparked something much larger. The celebration continued around them, a symphony of laughter and conversation and music from countless worlds, all blending into a harmony that transcended language and culture. Later that night, after the celebration had ended and the last guests had departed, Sarenth returned to her quarters and added a new ornament to the small tree she'd set up in her own rooms. It was a miniature replica of the collaborative tree from the atrium, crafted by Minthri artists as a gift to commemorate the second Christmas celebration. She hung it carefully next to the copper dragon ornament Ethan had made her that first year and stepped back to admire her growing collection. Each ornament represented a memory, a moment of connection, a choice to embrace joy rather than cynicism. This was what Christmas had given her, not just a single night of celebration, but a way of approaching the world, a commitment to finding and creating warmth in the cold darkness of space. She thought about her younger self, the princess who'd arrived on this station 8 months before that first Christmas, lost and angry and convinced that her exile was the end of her meaningful life. If she could send a message back to that version of herself, it would be simple. Your real life is about to begin, and it will start with a human janitor teaching you how to whistle. Sarenth activated her communication console and began drafting a message to her brother Corvin. The time had come to take the lessons she'd learned on Vexorus 7 back to the Dracarii Empire itself. The path would not be easy, and many would resist the changes she advocated. But she'd learned from both Christmas and from Ethan that the most worthwhile endeavors were often the most challenging. She wrote with confidence and clarity, outlining a vision for a Dracarii future that balanced strength with compassion, tradition with progress, pride with humility. As she wrote, snow began to fall outside her window, real snow this time, as Vexorus 7 entered its deep winter season. The flakes drifted past the station's lights, each one unique and beautiful, and Sarenth found the sight deeply appropriate. Like snowflakes, like the beings celebrating together in the atrium earlier that evening, the galaxy was full of infinite diversity, each individual unique and valuable. The challenge was learning to see that value, to celebrate it rather than fear it, to build bridges rather than walls. Somewhere in the station's maintenance wing, Ethan Cole was also looking out at the snow, a cup of cocoa in his hands and his grandmother's scarf around his neck despite the regulated temperature of his quarters. He thought about the strange turns life could take, how a simple decision to share his favorite holiday with a curious alien had led to friendships and changes he never could have anticipated. He thought about the future, about the possibility that this small celebration on a distant station might be the seed of something that would grow throughout the galaxy, a reminder that connection and kindness were possible even across vast differences. The crystal dragon Sarenth had given him caught the light from his small tree, casting dancing patterns across the walls of his quarters. He smiled, raised his cup in a silent toast to absent friends and to the spirit of Christmas that transcended species and time, and settled in to watch his favorite holiday movie, a tradition that felt both deeply human and somehow universal. On Vexorus 7, in the cold reaches of space far from Earth, two beings from different worlds had found common ground in a human holiday about hope and connection. They'd created something beautiful together, something that would endure and grow in ways they were only beginning to understand. The galaxy was vast and often cold, but in this small corner of it, warmth had taken root, and no amount of darkness could extinguish the light they'd kindled together. That was the true gift of Christmas, Sarenth and Ethan had both come to understand. Not the presents or decorations, or even the celebration itself, but the reminder that choosing connection over isolation, generosity over selfishness, and hope over despair could transform not just individuals, but entire communities, entire worlds, entire galaxies. It was a lesson worth sharing, worth protecting, worth fighting for in the years to come. And so the story might have ended, with the princess and the janitor having found their friendship and created their tradition, content in what they'd built together. But stories, like traditions, have a way of growing beyond their original boundaries. And the tale of the dragon princess and the human who taught her about Christmas was only beginning to spread through the Galactic Union, carried by those who'd attended the celebrations and been changed by them. Years would pass, and that simple celebration would become a symbol of a new approach to interspecies relations, a model for how beings from different worlds could find common ground without surrendering their unique identities. Sarenth would eventually return to the Dracarii Empire and, with her brother's support, would lead a quiet revolution in how her people engaged with the galaxy. Ethan would become an unlikely ambassador for human culture, his humble origins and genuine warmth making him more effective than many trained diplomats. But on this Christmas night, with snow falling outside and warmth glowing within, they were simply two friends who'd found each other across the vastness of space, united by a tradition that had proven to be as universal as the stars themselves. They'd learned that the greatest gifts were not things but moments of connection, not possessions but understanding, not power but the courage to be vulnerable enough to care. The dragon princess had never had a Christmas until a human janitor changed that in one night, and in doing so, had changed not just her life, but potentially the future of galactic civilization itself. It was a reminder that anyone, regardless of their position or power, could make a difference through simple acts of kindness and the willingness to share what they loved with an open heart. And perhaps that was the most important lesson of all, the one that would echo through the years to come and inspire countless others across the galaxy. That meaningful change often began not with grand gestures or political maneuvers, but with one person choosing to extend kindness to another, with one being deciding that connection mattered more than status, with one moment of genuine sharing that rippled outward in ways impossible to predict but beautiful to behold. On Vexorus 7, Christmas had found a new home among the stars, and in finding that home, had proven that the best human traditions were those that spoke to universal truths, that touched on needs and hopes shared by all sentient beings, regardless of their origin. The holiday would continue to grow and evolve, adapted by each species that embraced it, but at its core would always remain the simple message that Ethan had shared with Sarenth on that first night, that even in darkness, we can choose to create light, that even in isolation, we can choose to forge connection, that even in a vast and sometimes frightening universe, we can choose to believe in the power of kindness, generosity, and love. The story of the Dragon Princess and her first Christmas became a legend told across the galaxy, a reminder that the greatest adventures often began with the smallest gestures, and that the most profound changes often came from the most unexpected sources. It was a story that would inspire others to look beyond rank and species, to see the person behind the position, to remember that everyone, from the mightiest emperor to the humblest janitor, had something valuable to offer if only others would take the time to listen. And so, in a universe of infinite possibility, one human tradition found new life among the stars, transformed and adapted, but maintaining its essential spirit, proving that some truths were indeed universal. That connection mattered, that generosity enriched both giver and receiver, that taking the time to celebrate together, to pause in the midst of important work and simply enjoy each other's company, was not a distraction from what mattered, but was itself among the most important things of all. The galaxy would never be quite the same after that first Christmas celebration on Vexorus 7, and countless beings would find their lives enriched by a tradition that began with a princess asking a janitor about a curious sound he was making, a question that opened a door to understanding and friendship that would never fully close. It was a testament to the power of curiosity, of openness, of the willingness to learn from anyone regardless of their station, and of the simple truth that sometimes the best teachers were those who never expected to teach anything at all, who simply lived their values so genuinely that others couldn't help but want to learn from them. Ethan Cole had taught Princess Sarenth about Christmas, but in doing so, he taught her something far more important, That worthiness was not determined by rank or power, that wisdom could be found in unexpected places, that the courage to be vulnerable and open was its own kind of strength. These lessons would shape her reign when she eventually returned home, would influence the reforms she championed, would ripple through the Dracarii Empire and beyond in ways that would take generations to fully manifest. And all of it, every change and growth and moment of transformation, could be traced back to one night when a janitor decided to share his favorite holiday with a curious princess, when a tradition from one small blue planet found new life among the stars, when two beings from vastly different worlds discovered that the space between them was not so vast after all, that friendship could bridge any divide, that kindness was the most universal language in the entire cosmos. The Dragon Princess never had a Christmas until a human janitor changed that in one night. It was a simple truth, a small story in the grand scope of galactic history, but like all the best stories, it contained within it truths that would echo through time, reminding all who heard it that the most profound changes often began with the simplest gestures, that connection was always possible for those brave enough to reach across the divides that separated them, and that in choosing generosity, kindness, and hope, any being, of any species, from any world, could create light in the darkness and warmth in the cold. And that was the end of the story. If you listened all the way to here, don't forget to leave feedback about what you thought of the story in the comments, whether positive or negative. Your feedback helps us improve. Also leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. And I'll leave here on the screen another video that I'm sure you'll like. Big hug, and see you in the next story.